Hello and welcome to Running Your Stories episode 17 with Martin Slack. Martin comes in today for a chat about some different types of races. He's an experienced marathon runner who moved on to ultra, but has done the kinds of races where you start laps every hour, the kind of races where you run in a pack, and if you drop out of the pack, you're out of the race. So some different kinds of races we talk about the pros and cons of those. And an interesting little thing that Martin didn't remind me about until after the podcast was that he'd actually contacted me asking to do a podcast with us in order to motivate himself that bit further to make sure he completed the Paris by Night Ultra, which he DNF'd in a year earlier. So an interesting thing to get yourself signed up to a podcast to come on to do an interview about a race that you don't know whether you can actually complete. Definitely a motivator. You don't want to let people down after you've made promises like that. So yeah, an interesting chat. Some good things came up. Martin's also done quite a lot of volunteering at different races, so we have a chat about that side of things as well. So here's episode 17. Welcome, Martin, to Running Your Stories.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So we've just been out with I'm trying to start this tradition of going out for a run with people before we do the podcast.
Yeah.
Did it a couple of episodes ago with Kim. We had a lovely run in the fog, so she didn't actually see any of the local area.
Yeah.
But it's quite a nice way to try and relax people a bit before we start chatting.
Yeah.
But when the countdown happened, I kind of left you. So sorry about that.
That's fine.
It wasn't the plan. I did intend to run with you.
Yeah. I think I'd possibly taken your I can run it, not race it a little too literally. But,
Well, yeah, that was my plan, so I'm just getting back into running after a rest and recovery period, but my feet decided they wanted to go, so yeah, it was fun. It was the King of the Hill, one of the local races around here, up and down the little hill.
yeah.
How do you find it?
It was different because the only time we've done this before was a 6-hour event, so you try and force yourself going up a bit faster. But I thought it's the first time I've done it at night as well, so stuff that you take for granted where you can see rocks coming during the day isn't really the same, and you've got just a head torch to guide you.
Yeah, I've had a bit of practice at night running lately, so yeah, although I was a good, I think, 6 minutes behind my PB, so
Yeah.
I blame that all on the night running, honestly.
Well, that's your running pace, not your racing pace, isn't it?
Yeah, yep. So, your story then, Martin. How long have you been running for?
I did my first marathon in 2009,
Right.
and then I've sort of gradually moved up from marathons to ultras about 2013. That I'd tried to get under a certain time for marathon running and sort of lost quite a bit of enjoyment out of it by not getting under that time.
Yeah.
So then I switched. I think the first ultra I did was about 35 miles. So that was nice because it was more of a day out with cake and stuff at checkpoints that you weren't focused on. I'll break my back to get under this time.
Yes.
And then I've sort of gradually moved up in distance since 2013 with different ultra races.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the moving away from pushing yourself for a time, because that's kind of similar decision that I made when I started getting into running, as to, do I keep pushing for a time or do I keep seeing how far I can go?
Yeah.
And yeah, it sounds like you found the distance more enjoyable.
I think it's interesting because you still have times in ultras where you're trying to get to a certain section by a particular time, but it's not the same time, just in a different location that you get with marathons, that you'll see 4 or 5 landmarks in a different city and you'll still aim for a time that is very similar to what you aimed for 3 or 4 months ago.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point, that the variation in ultras is massive, isn't it? That one ultra to another ultra is very difficult to compare them.
Yeah.
Whereas marathon to marathon, unless you get into something like the Hardmoors marathons, I think they're quite different. But because some of those are like 28, 29 miles, so there's a bit of variation in them. But I agree. I think when you talk to people about marathons, it's a very much, well, what was your time?
Yeah.
Talk to people about ultras, it's just like, did you finish?
Yeah.
It's usually the first question.
Yeah, it's a bit more binary, isn't it? Which can be nice.
Yeah. So what was your first ultra then? You're saying
The Van Drippen Ultra, which was 35 miles, and it was quite a steady sort of. There wasn't too much elevation in it, so I think it was a big change for me from doing that to my second ultra, which had probably twice the amount of elevation that the 35 did.
Yeah.
So the second ultra I did was the Grand Tour of Skiddaw in the Lake District.
Yeah, that will be a bit more elevation.
So I think it was like there was a 8 mile section that wasn't too hilly, and then there was a sort of horseshoe bit that was really hilly that involved Skiddaw, and then the same 8 miles back to the start. But me and the person I was running with, when we were coming up Skiddaw, we came back down the wrong way. So then we ended up having to go back up to the top again and then come back down the correct way, which was certainly eye-opening in terms of a day out compared to what I had with a 35 miler the year before.
Yeah. Because again, when you start getting onto those kinds of trail ultras and even because mountain marathons, for example, are more like ultras than they are like marathons, aren't they? But when you start getting into these things, navigation and other complications comes into it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the time of day as well. That like when I did the 35, I started in the light and I finished in the light. When I did the 44, there was a good 2 hours near the end, even though this was like close to the middle of summer, where you're running in the dark and you're having to use a head torch, which when the first time you're doing that's in race conditions does take some getting used to.
Yeah, although that's one of the reasons why I like these kinds of little races like we did tonight, because it's an opportunity to go out in race conditions, running by head torch, and just get that little bit of experience. Which I mean, because for me that's where sort of short races are quite useful, because you can just kind of rock up, get that bit of experience, and you haven't had to put the huge effort into it that you do a few times a year on the big events. So.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice as well with the route that we've done tonight that it's virtually impossible to get lost. That the only turn-offs is literally into somebody's drive or something, that it's just one road and then you turn around and run back.
Although the guy who was just ahead of me at that point in time nearly went the wrong way there. I don't know how. But yeah, it was just when I was catching him as well. So after Tour of Skiddaw,
I then signed up for a race in Ireland called the Last One Standing. That for some reason sorry,
microphone back on.
I thought it would be a massive gap from doing 44 as a mount as part of the Lake District to doing 50 in 12 hours on like a 4.2 mile loop. We have 1 hour to do each loop. The weather in February was unfortunately considerably worse than what I'd been used to in the lakes, and I dropped out at 42 miles, which was largely similar to what I'd managed in the lakes, but it was interesting getting used to that format. So it seems to have got very popular since the year I did it, and I think it's something that will probably end up being quite a dominant thing in ultra running, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a recent was it Bigsy's Backyard Ultra. You know, that's a very famous last man standing variant of these kinds of things. A ridiculously serious one. And again, as you say, these things seem to be getting very popular. Another one of our guests, Carl Howells, holds the record on one of the British ones, which I don't recall the name of it right now, and he keeps telling me I need to go and have a go at it with him.
Was this the one that was like a 2 mile loop or something? I remember it being quite small.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's about a 2 mile loop. And he did something crazy like 200 miles or something.
It was quite eye opening for me because like the 2 races that I'd done before that, it was very much there were people who've run the same distance faster than you, but the gap between them doing it and you finishing doesn't seem that much. When it's a race that continues on and on and on. Like it was part of like a family holiday that I was doing this race in, and me and my wife and the in-laws had been to like the Titanic Museum and had a full day out the next morning, and sort of by the time we got back from all of that, the winner was just about finishing.
It is incredible what the elite guys can do, but again, it's one of the best things I find about running is the fact that there's almost no sports where you go out on exactly the same course at the same time in exactly the same conditions as the elite people.
Yeah.
You know, you don't go and drive your car around a Formula One racetrack.
Yeah.
You don't go and play football at Wembley Stadium.
Yeah.
But you go and run exactly the same course as the elite people.
Yeah. I think that was one of
it's really good.
yeah, that was one of the nice things about sort of you have to wait till the start of the next hour to start your next lap, that you'd be talking to people who in a normal race you wouldn't necessarily be at the same pace as.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting format, as you say, the starting a lap every hour. Definitely an interesting format. It is something I'd like to try sometime. Maybe that one in Ireland is an interesting one to do. Is it trail or?
Mostly trail, yeah. So it's at Castle Ward. So
right.
They have like Game of Thrones tours that are sometimes in the way of certain times of day when you run them. It's quite interesting. Yeah, it's quite popular as well. With like the starting field at lunchtime is massive, so you do feel like you're in part of a big race.
Yeah. That's definitely an interesting one. And then what do you move on to from there?
It was so. I think because I'd sort of fallen just short of 50, I wanted to enter something where, regardless if I have to walk it, I'm definitely doing over 50. So I'd picked a 100k with a comically high cut-off. So the London to Brighton Challenge was like a run/walk event.
Yes.
So it was 34 hours was the time it would allow me to run just over 60 miles. Mm-hmm. So this was, I think, around the May bank holiday. So it was, again, like nice and warm conditions that, apart from the last maybe hour and a half, it was all in daylight, and it was relatively flat for the first 50 miles. There's only one hill that came after that. So I was quite pleased that I'd managed to sort of conquer that demon of getting over 50 miles, even if I had a considerable cut-off that I didn't really need in the end. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a few interesting things about that. It's something I've been saying to quite a few people, because I'm a big believer in people pushing themselves and believing in yourself, and you know the only way you can find out what you can really do is by giving it a go. But then races have cut-offs for a reason. You know, cut-offs are there because the volunteers need to go home at the end of that time. Apart from anything, you know, it's really unfair and unsafe for the volunteers for them to be out for longer, because they need to be fed and looked after as well. And so doing what you did there, choosing a challenge event, which therefore is catering for really long cut-off times, is an ideal way of doing it. And I really like that approach. And I've used that myself on to kind of try out different kinds of events, and it's interesting running and things like that as well, which is set up as more of a challenge than it is a race. Although, you know, there's still some people at the front racing it, absolutely. It still has quite a different dynamic and sort of atmosphere to it, or certainly the ones I've done do.
I think it's quite interesting that, although, like you said, the elite are sort of still at the front and probably as good as the elite that enter like more serious races where you have to have done a 50 to qualify, for example. There's people who would maybe be walking the full thing that you wouldn't see anywhere near an ultra that would be harder to get into. That can be quite nice to, like, for them it's a really difficult challenge to walk that distance in that cut-off. So it's interesting seeing it from their point of view as well. To be honest, I'd find it difficult to walk 50 miles. I'd get bored. It's the only reason why I started trying to get faster is because it's more efficient. I've got a work colleague who's walked 100 before that I just can't get my head around.
That'd be really, really tough. I mean, it's, you know, I've done the Spine Challenger a couple of times now, and huge respect for the people that come in just under the cut-off. It's a 60-hour cut-off on that, because you're carrying a lot of kit in winter, and you know, and some people are stopping to sleep along the way and things like that. But to be out in the elements for 60 hours or 55 or 58 hours, 59 hours, that's really tough. You know, it's tough being out for that long, and that's where my urge to go faster over that distance came from, is that I really wanted to do the challenge, but I didn't want to face being out in it for that length of time. If I was capable of, you know, the first time round I was thinking, okay, originally started planning on 55 hours because that gave me a bit of margin against the cut-off, and then I thought, well, hold on, I'm getting a bit fitter now, maybe I can go for sort of 45. And then I started being a bit ambitious and then ended up at 46. But yeah, 46 hours out in the elements and lack of sleep and everything is a lot less than 56.
Yeah.
So
I think the sort of sleep deprivation side, it must get comparatively worse as well. That it's close to another night that you'd be doing for.
Yeah, exactly. That's that's what I'm saying. It's huge respect to the people that do it that way. It's really tough.
So after that, I'd volunteered at a 50k race in Wales before the London to Brighton race, and as part of my thing for volunteering, they gave me a free place for the next year. So what you were saying about them having cut-offs for a reason, this was the tightest cut-off for any race I've done. So it was quite a hill. I think it was about 2,600 metres of climb for the 100k, and it was a 16-hour cut-off. So I'd sort of planned that because I'd entered a race for July that was about 2,400 metres of climb, that if I could manage this, that was 100k, I should be able to do the race that was slightly longer with slightly less elevation.
Yep.
But everything that I'd done on road just didn't prepare me for what this had on trail. So there was people when I'd volunteered the year before who dropped out at 50k who'd signed up for the 100. And so I've had in the back of my mind for a year, I'm not going to be somebody who does that I've come down to Wales to volunteer, I'm not going to drop out at halfway. So I managed to make it to 75k, but then was absolutely shredded and couldn't leave the checkpoint to head back.
So what was it that shredded you?
I think it partly the heat and then partly the hills. That it's one thing including hills that are road and flat and you go in a straight line. Mm-hmm. When you're sort of having diagonal stuff and you having to actually watch where your feet are placing, it's a lot more effort. And I think the main thing that I learned from that was having my training on a similar surface to what the race was going to be.
Yeah. So do you think it's because there is a very clear difference, like you say, when you're road running, every time you place your foot, it's going down in almost exactly the same position. And when you're trail running or fell running, you're twisting and turning all the time, so you're using the muscles quite differently. Yeah. And is that what was the problem, basically, that those kind of little pieces of side muscle weren't quite strong enough and got exhausted?
I think that would have been most of it. And then, like, you'll know from when you do races, if you sit down, that's almost game over. That once I'd sat down at the checkpoint, 75k checkpoint, I wasn't getting back up in any state that I could run. I'd learnt from that if I don't have a similar amount of elevation in my main training weeks to what the race is going to be, I'm not going to be able to finish it. Mm-hmm. So I think I had 9 weeks of like pretty serious training between this and then doing the Great Glen Ultra. So I tried to make it that if I could have the total elevation that I do in that week at least equivalent to what I'd have to do on race day, I'd be quite confident that regardless of what the weather was like and the conditions on the day, that I'd be able to do it.
I follow that logic.
So the Great Glen Ultra had a 1 a.m. start time. Mm-hmm. So I tried to sort of face some of the battles that I'd have in the race in my training beforehand. So I had a run in the woods near my house that started at 1 a.m. and went through till sunrise, so as that I'd know that I could do that bit of it.
Good plan.
And then I think the worst climbs, I'd tried to make it so as that I'd have stuff where it was me going up a hill, coming straight back down, and then going up so as that I wouldn't have really the recovery break that I would from doing loops of a trail. I was quite keen that they had a drop bag element, so you could have 6 checkpoints where they'd bring your sort of like freezer bag of stuff. So I'd tried experimenting with different things that I could, if I've got 10 or 12 miles to look forward to this, I want it to be something that I'm really going to like. So I'd tried to make it that I had stuff that I would be quite happy having first thing on the morning for the first couple of checkpoints. And then my last checkpoint was a Duvel Citra IPA that was like just under 9%. So having in the back of my mind that I could have this at the end was quite nice. From doing the London to Brighton challenge, where I'd reached pretty much the same distance as that for the last checkpoint, that I'd have that, and then I know I'd have 10 miles to go before the end. Unfortunately, I'd hurt some of the ligaments on the outside of my knee about 10 miles or so into the race, and just thought it was like fighting sleep and just something knocked it on something. But I think once I'd reached that last checkpoint and realised I've got quite a bit of a buffer under the cut-off, all the adrenaline of I need to keep going at this pace to finish went. So it was quite a grim sort of last leg to actually get to the finish. So I think it was something like 4 hours 15 for the last 10 miles.
Yeah.
But I think
I've taken longer than that.
it's difficult when you've got, like, for 15 hours or so you've been aiming to maintain a constant pace, so you know that you don't necessarily need to maintain it to get to the end. But yeah, that was that was the longest distance that I've done, and that was the last race that I had before the Paris by Night. Yep.
No, it's definitely interesting. So Paris by Night. This is because you emailed after hearing a few of the podcasts, didn't you, saying that you had this Paris by Night coming up, and I was definitely intrigued by the whole format of the race, and I've been sightseeing in Paris during the day, so it's quite interesting to hear about it. So do you want to just kind of give an overview of what the race is about, where it goes, what the format is?
Okay, so it's a 50-mile race that starts at 10 p.m. and is run as a pack. So the idea is that it's meant to go past 100 monuments in whatever time the pack takes to cover the full distance. So it's nice and vague. That'll give you an estimate time in kilometres per hour. You can tell it's a French race. And then,
so I work in kilometres per hour. It works fine for me.
Yeah. And the idea is that the pack will maintain that speed, and if you fall behind the pack, you're out of the race. But it's sort of, there's sections where people can jump on and run like 10 miles or half a marathon with the group and then drop out at the next checkpoint. But the majority of the group will try and run the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So it's notoriously difficult. That the race organiser has set a pace that for the last, I think, three or four events before this year, only 10% of the people who'd started had finished. So it's normally quite a small field that 30 or 40 runners would start, but it was always 3 or 4 at the end. So it was quite, because I'd tried to do it last year as well, it was quite a big thing that out of the people who'd finished in the previous ones, they'd all been French. So I was quite keen that if I was in a group with quite a few international runners, to be one of the first few who finished it, who had travelled from abroad to get there.
So 100 monuments.
Yeah.
Can you name them?
I could probably name about 30. I think because last year I'd been a bit more touristy, like, I recognise that, and asking some of the people who spoke English, what's this one? This year it was, I was almost more focused on definitely finishing the race.
Yes.
But there were certain things that when they lit up at night, I'd imagine are possibly more impressive than during the day. Mm-hmm. So like the Eiffel Tower does seem considerably more impressive in the middle of the night, where it's like lighting up the whole city.
Yeah.
There's one building that's lit up in green at night that I'd watched the video the year before I did it for the first time, and sort of thought that was quite cool to see in the video for it. So that was something that I was very keen to get to last year.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice that, because a lot of the buildings that we'll have over here, it's either lit up in floodlight yellow or nothing. So yes. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
There wasn't much in terms of elevation, but the Montmartre steps was the main thing that you had that was any sort of climb. Yeah. So it was quite nice that you could see the whole city lit up once you reached the top of that. And we ran past Moulin Rouge sort of just before you start the climb up to there. And it's quite a long street that is very different from the rest of Paris where Moulin Rouge is. And I can remember from last year when I tried it, having a discussion with one of the French people if this was classed as one of the 100 monuments, and he was very assertive that it definitely was. So I found that quite funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought you were supposed to run into it, not run past it.
That was the night after. But yeah, it was quite nice that, like, there's certain parts of the race that you can tell people have almost saved themselves for. So there was a section with bridges that you go, I think there's 17 bridges in total, that you'll go across one, cross to the other side and then back, and then, so the idea is that you're running across every bridge to make your way from one side of the river to the other.
Cool.
So while it doesn't sound like much in terms of the elevation to do a couple of steps up onto a bridge and then the crest over the river, when you're trying to hold a pace that you've held on flat for quite a long period of time, that can be the difference between, well, I'd guess 40 or 50% of the field finishing and 10%.
It's also going to be quite a lot of tight turns as well, I would have thought, which, like you say, when you've been running on the flat, most of the streets in Paris are quite wide and wide walkways as well. Those you're going to be, I would have thought, you're taking lots of 90-degree turns around the bridges. You don't want to go too wide because that's extra distance. So you've suddenly got a whole bunch of twists and turns, and like you say, little rises over the bridges. Because I know when we had Amjad on, who'd done the it's the over the Humber Bridge, Hell on the Humber. That again, that's okay. It's a big bridge, but it's just kind of curved all the way over, and so on that you're never really running on the flat.
I can remember when I did the Manchester Marathon that there was loads of presumably very fast, experienced, like sub 2:30 people who were complaining about the bridge that they'd included in one of the small sections. Like, surely this can't be much of a difference, but it must have been in terms of
but if you're focusing on those few seconds off your PB, then people get very focused, don't they? So did you snap a lock onto the bridge on your way across? Or?
I know there's a lot of people that had. To be honest, because I'd reached the Notre Dame checkpoint last year, and that was like halfway through the bridges section, I was very focused on, I can't travel all this way and get less than what I managed last year. And then there wasn't that much between the Notre Dame bit and the end of the bridges section. So although it was hard to sort of think, because you sometimes have in the back of your mind, if I get to this, I'll be happy and I've made an improvement on last year, but I'm not necessarily finished. Having that bit forced out of your mind for the rest of the bridges section was like the main challenge of the race. So it wouldn't really make sense to think, I did 40 last year, but I'll come and do 45 but not finish 50. So I was very keen to make sure that at least we got to the end of the bridges, I knew I'd have a good chance of finishing the race. So this year was actually the exception to the 10% finishing rule. So I think there were 7 out of 32 runners that finished, which was obviously a big improvement on 10%. But it was quite interesting that people who I thought would finish based on how comfortable they seemed last year didn't. And then there were some people who weren't running it last year who just made it look effortless and managed to run the whole thing really easily. So there was certain like cheap psychological tricks I'd try on myself that would help me get from one bit of the race to the next. So if there was like one section where it looked like somebody was almost slowing down, I'd try and make sure that I was at least keeping up with them. So I wasn't necessarily at because the pack could be sort of maybe 20 or 30 metres between the first runner and the back of it. So I try and make sure that I wasn't at the very back of the pack, because I wouldn't necessarily back myself to be able to catch up 20 or 30 metres if that person drops out. So it was quite interesting that even though some of those people would struggle for a bit and then sort of continue on, me forcing myself to keep up with them helped me get through that little section. I'm just remembering about doing that. It wasn't an official pack as such, but when I did the Oldham Way Ultra last year, we ended up running with a group of about 5 of us. Ended up sticking together in a group, and that was similar, because when one person started slowing down, the group wasn't waiting for them. We didn't know each other before the race, so we had no obligation to wait for each other. And that just kind of made you push a bit through while you're having a low point, and stick with the group, because it was much more efficient being in the group for route finding and knowing where you're going. Now, of course, in your case, you just have to stick with the group. But it's an interesting dynamic compared to running on your own, because I found sometimes when I'm on my own for a length of time in a race, you start making excuses to yourself sometimes as to why it's okay to slow down, until someone catches you up, and then I give myself a kick and think, right, well, stick with this person, and then the next one comes in, stick with this person. I think it's quite easy to sort of think only one of us needs to read a map, or only one of us needs to light the way or something. So like the one we did tonight, one of the people on the way back down the 5k loop, we essentially decided we'll just share head torches and light up the same bit. That was quite nice. you knew if one of the batteries died, you're not going to be running in pitch black for the last couple of K.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what was the dynamic like within the group? Is it really friendly, trying to encourage each other, or is it?
I think there was quite a lot of the group that were certain they were going to finish before they'd set off. So like because you're meeting McDonald's half an hour before the race starts, and when they were asking if I was confident about finishing this year, I was doing the usual sort of British underconfidence thing and saying hopefully, and they were a bit surprised that like why would he come back if he's not thinking he's going to finish. So you could tell in terms of the people who set off thinking they were going to finish, and then there wasn't really much point where they, even though the running style might not look as economical, they didn't really look like they were ever going to drop out. It was quite nice as well that like there'd be bits of sharing food and water at checkpoints and stuff like that. But it was quite interesting that some of the people who wanted to fly off at the start weren't actually the ones that ended up finishing. So I think because like there'll be quite a lot of them that their natural running pace will be a lot faster than what the race pace was. They possibly found it quite hard to slow down to that pace and keep warm.
Yeah, well, also I think it depends what their running background is, because it's one of the hardest things when you first get into ultras is slowing down and just getting used to the fact that the longer the ultra is, the slower you've got to go. And you see it all the time. People going off too fast, and I know because I've done it myself. Go off too fast, and you catch them up later on and pass them. Which is what I'd aimed to do on the last one, but unfortunately the guys I was chasing held their pace. Good on them. If I hadn't got injured, I think I would have got them, but they did well. Because they ran as a three guys from the same mountain rescue team, and it's a tough thing to do, to stick together for 108 miles. Because you've got that whole dynamic of if one starts to slow down or struggle, do you drag him on with you? Because sometimes the group works like that, as we were saying, but also if someone really starts to struggle, it can slow the whole group down, and then you've got to make the decision about at what point you break up the group. Because they were slow getting through the first checkpoint, and I caught them up and got ahead of them then. But then I had a sort of bit of a down moment during the night, and they passed me. I was still confident I'd catch them up again, but then I got injured, and actually looking on the sort of sector timings and things afterwards, once I was injured I was doing the same pace as them. I didn't lose any more ground, but I wasn't able to gain ground then because I was injured, but that had been my plan, you see. I wasn't worried about them being ahead of me until we get to the last, I don't know, 15-20 miles. I could just speed up then.
I suppose you'd have probably had it that you'd have recce'd certain sections of it, and you'd know that you could do this in a certain time based on your training, would you?
It was more about just the fact that I was very focused on using the right sort of parts of my energy reserves in the running on fat, and only when I was getting near the end, if I took the decision that I was willing to kind of be depleted at the finish, I could then speed up and cut into my carb reserves, and finish with nothing left. Which is what Jim Mann, who won the race, he had nothing left. He burst into tears live on camera. But he absolutely smashed the course record by hours. He's but it was, which is actually very different, because on the longer race that Jasmine Paris absolutely destroyed the course record on. She finished, smile on her face, asking where her husband and daughter were, posing for the camera. Different sort of mindset and different strategy as to what state you leave your body in. So I was looking at staying in that good state for as long as possible, and then if I thought I was close enough and was it was worthwhile to push that hard at the end, then I would. But as I say, in the end I was injured. And then I just looked at the time with about 2k to go. I think I had about 20 minutes to make sure I got a full 10 hours off my time from last year. And 2k at the end of 170k or whatever I'd done with an injury. in 20 minutes is hard work.
Yeah.
I had to really push hard, but I wanted the full 10 hours. I didn't want to be saying to people, well, it was nearly 10 hours off.
Yeah.
So it was 10 hours, 1.5 minutes off in the end.
Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer in the whole, like, it's almost like a dog who knows it's close to home, that you do sort of sense when you're closer to the end and your body does get something from somewhere that lets you finish at a slightly faster pace.
Yeah, and like you say, that's something from somewhere is what I've kind of really been looking into, because obviously that's there all the time. And I'm trying to learn how to be able to almost tap into that at will, which is the ultimate goal. I'm a long way off that, but that's kind of the idea that, you hear about people performing heroics, when there's disasters going on, and your body's capable of doing that all the time. And can you tap into it?
Yeah, it's quite interesting that sort of there's occasionally people who'll go through that stage to get under a cut-off for a checkpoint.
Yeah. So I'm just going to move you my graph. Carry on talking.
And then they'll find that from to go to the well to get under that cut-off, the rest of the race they're fine. That you'll get some people that if it's a 50-mile race, for example, the sort of 30-mile checkpoint will be hell for them to get under, and then 40 is easy, and then they get to the finish well within the cut-off.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's some races that don't necessarily have the same constant pacing in terms of where the place the cut-offs to take into account this now, which can be quite interesting, because you'd think if you weren't knowledgeable about what it's like being in that situation, you just have a cut-off for the finish and then work backwards in terms of a constant time for the rest of it.
I think part of that is just the fact that there's always some people that enter the race that are going to really kind of struggle and might need to get rescued. And I do wonder, and I need to talk to some of the individual race directors, I do wonder whether they sometimes put a cut off there to weed those people out as early as possible.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to rescue them early on in the race, it's kind of a lot easier. All your volunteers are fresh, everybody knows what's going on, it's still daytime.
Yeah.
And you kind of get... I don't know whether that happens or not. I have my suspicions. But back to your Paris by Night.
Yeah.
So, we've established that you're finished, or you got near the finish. And so this thing's been running as a group. Is there then a sprint finish for placings or something? How does it sort of finish then?
It's very much that, once you got past the British section, everybody knows that's the hardest part of the race over with. So the pace doesn't really drop from that, but it does feel easier because you know that it's near the end, and essentially the people who've dragged themselves over 17 bridges aren't going to drop on a relatively flat bit before the finish.
Yes.
So it was quite nice that, although the group had shortened dramatically in size from the start of the Notre Dame bit to the end of the bridges, so I think it went down to about 8 so there was one person who dropped out, I think the second to last bridge, but he went from probably about 15 or 20 down to 8 over that small section. So I think you almost knew that because there's only a select few of you left, that you're going to force each other to finish.
Yeah.
And I think you'll have this from doing races that are, when you get close to the end, you know that you don't necessarily need the emergency supply for an emergency anymore. So stuff that you've had in the back of your pack for quite a long time, you'll just have, and it gives you stuff that you know that you'll get over the line. So I had the sesame bars and pistachio bars that I'd had as if in case of emergency break glass sort of thing. That was quite nice to have those quite close to the finish. I'd also made the decision, because last year I'd ran out of water and there was only really one checkpoint where you could fill it up with more. I'd bought a bigger bladder, so I'd switched from a 2 litre one to a 3 litre, which I was a bit nervous about the extra weight, but I was quite happy that I knew if I'd filled it right up to the top on the second checkpoint, I wouldn't necessarily have to worry about measuring what I was having. So I knew that once I was on to the last bit after the bridges, I could have as much water as I wanted to get to the end.
Yeah, it's I found that a big psychological thing. I really dislike running out of food or water. Doesn't mean I need to have a lot, and the more I run, and kind of the fitter and healthier I get, the less I need during the race.
Yeah.
But I do find a big psychological blow if I run out.
I think the water's possibly a bigger thing for me, that I can sort of convince myself that I can have food at the finish.
Yeah.
But like, I find water, especially if it's quite a long time between when I've last had some and when I know I'll get more, that that's definitely more difficult to try and put up with.
Yeah.
So it was quite nice that when we actually got to the finish, that the race organiser had like there was like food, and he had a variation of different beers that you could choose from. So it finishes, I think it's called Flame de Resistance. That's, you have to go up quite a big hill to get to it, but it's quite nice that it's on the cusp of getting light, and there's like it's almost naturally lit because of the flame. That was quite a nice place to end the race at.
Yeah. So it's just everybody finishes together, or do you get placings? Or?
Yeah, it's classed as everybody who reaches that point has finished the race in the same time. So I think it's like some people initially setting off at the pace that you're going at will find it faster than what they usually run at. So there was one point, I think about 20 miles in, where a good chunk of the group just disappeared. But I think once you've got past that point, it's almost like, unless the British section breaks people, they're going to finish.
Yeah.
So I think there was people who came this year that, if they come back again, would definitely finish because they know certain points of the route and where they need to push themselves.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of it. If you're familiar with the territory, then you'll know sort of where you need to put in your best efforts.
Yeah, it's not something that's easy to go and recce every other weekend, is it?
When I tried it last year, that was the first time I'd ever been to Paris, so it was definitely a new experience.
Yeah.
And the weather that we have in Yorkshire for training in winter is a lot harsher than what you have over there. So I think the coldest it was when I was training was -2 for like an 8-hour training run. So I knew that regardless of what came up in Paris, it wasn't going to be as bad as that. But yeah, I think the thing of having trained at a similar time of day as well, so I tried to have like my longest training run started at midnight and went through till 8 a.m. So I knew that because the race started at 10, the extra 2 hours running in Paris before that wouldn't necessarily make that much difference, but I knew that I could run through the complete night because I'd done it a month ago in training.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a big thing to train on. I think that, like you say, or you exactly as you were saying earlier, you need to train on the same kind of terrain. Now in this case it's road, so that's quite easy. But obviously it mattered a lot on other events that you've done.
Yeah.
You need to train at the same time of the day or going through the night if it's an event that's going to go through the night, because as you mentioned, when the very first time you were forced to start running in the dark by head torch, it's a surprise.
Yeah.
It's different. And then depending on the type of race is also training with the same equipment. Now in this case, equipment sounds like it's your bladder and whatever you're carrying it with. So and your head torch, it's relatively easy stuff to train with.
In terms of mandatory kit lists, it was quite minimalist. Yeah. So it was essentially, we're classing you as a responsible adult. Make sure you can be seen. Other than that, like what you feel you need to finish the race. So I think the race organiser didn't really carry any water with him and just sort of ate at the one checkpoint. But he's somebody who's used to doing that sort of distance on very little fuel.
Yeah.
I think I was the only person who had anywhere near 3 litres of water with them, but then I'm comparatively bigger than a lot of the other people who were doing the race. Yeah.
As I say, I've been out, and I mean even last year on the spine, I was carrying more than 2 litres of fluids between water and sports drinks and different things. This year, although you have to have 2 litres of carrying capability. Yeah. So I put a 2 litre bladder in my pack and left it empty this year, and then had 2 bottles on the front, which is a 750ml and a 500ml. But there's plenty of places along the way to refill, and I only dipped into the 500ml a couple of times, which was the plan. That's, so I knew I had that reserve all the time, because like we're saying, it's a psychological blow if you run out of water. And so I knew I had that reserve, so I could get between the points. But we're probably talking about running like 30k-ish on a litre of water if you're going to do it that way. So it depends, whether you can do that. But
I think it's something that you almost learn through your training, though, isn't it? That you'll take the pad out with you, and I think I've almost coached myself to have less than what I would have had, say, when I tried the race last year. That I won't necessarily gulp water. That I've sort of gone 10 or 12 miles without any, and then have loads. That I've tried to learn to have little and often. That seems to work a bit better. Yeah, no,
it definitely works better, little and often, and then as I was saying, over time, how much you need reduces because your body's becoming more efficient through all the training and good diet and things. Your body just it doesn't waste as much. It's one of the other things that I need to look into. I have recently found a dietitian who can help me with some answers, which is useful. I eat a very, very low salt diet. Because almost everything I eat is made from scratch. And so I don't put salt in it, because I know the few things I eat that aren't made from scratch have got too much in. So, overall, I get enough. I almost never get cramp. I'm going to get cramp now that I've said this, but it's not the first podcast I've mentioned this on. And what I've read, and I say I'm not an expert, and I'm interested to learn more about this. What I've read is that your body gets used to having so little salt, and therefore when you sweat out less salt, so you don't need to replace as much. Whereas my friend Howard, who's just putting in fantastic result after fantastic result, you know Howard as well, he's absolutely smashing it, but he has to have salt capsules in pretty much every drink of water that he has through the whole race. Otherwise he cramps up during the race. And it's now, our bodies are different. It's not just a diet thing, but it's just the way my diet's evolved and what I've got used to. All I did for like a 36-hour race was about a tenth of my fruit and nut mix was salted nuts. Okay. And that's the salt I was having. Everything else I had was pretty much salt free.
I've almost found, in terms of when I've been running, a similar thing with caffeine, that if you go for a stage where you're having loads of caffeine through the day anyway, that you'll sort of need it for the time that you're training. But if you have a time where you're not using as much, the actual impact that will have on a race or just before a race is far more. And you don't necessarily feel like you urgently need it during a race, whereas you would do if you're having it every couple of hours when you're not really training.
Yeah, well, that's right, and caffeine's a really good example, because it's you can feel it. Everyone can feel it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're used to having 8 cups of coffee a day, and you go and do a race that's a day long, you're going to need 8 cups of coffee just to be level, just to be normal. And therefore, there is performance boost that you can get from caffeine. But if your level is 8 cups of coffee a day, to get a performance boost, you're going to have to be on like 16, 20, which is then going to have diuretic effects. And so some people completely come off caffeine ahead of races, so that then they can have it in the race and sort of boost themselves. Personally, I try not to rely on anything like that, because partly it's caffeine's a drug. I mean, I drink tea. It's caffeinated tea. I'm not saying I don't touch caffeine, but I don't try and train myself to get a boost from it. I really like it during races. It's really nice when I get a nice cup of tea halfway through a race. It's fantastic. But I just think that if you did get yourself to a stage where you're taking, because there's you can get caffeinated gels and different drinks. If you go to your pack and that gel's not there, and you've just got to take something from the aid station that's not caffeinated, it's going to have such a sort of blow to you. And so it's just my view. My view is to just try and just be able to cope with the worst case, which is you're relying on what you're getting.
Yeah.
And then you still carry your preferences.
Yeah.
But that's kind of then a bonus rather than relying on I've got to have exactly this gel at 15 seconds into this.
Yeah.
When I pass that corner, I've got to have that. Because you drop one gel and suddenly you're upset and you're pulling out the race.
It's a big thing with incentivisation that the incentive's got to be there when you want it, isn't it? That
Yeah.
I've sort of learnt from like almost abusing energy drinks and stuff to the point where I've not benefited anything from them. That if I have something that's like more of a treat that's further into a race, I'll feel the benefit a bit more. So I've tried using stuff that's quite heavily caffeinated for like long training runs and like more frequent points than I really should have, and I've found that I've had quite bad experiences afterwards of not being able to sleep and like heart rate going ridiculously high. So I think it's almost like you need to work out where the line is, that then you can bring it back, and you'll know that if you've not had it for a while and then you've got it to look for, like I had a similar thing with a beer at the Paris race. That last year when I did it, I had a beer at the checkpoint. It's about halfway, and then it's like I've had my beer. I'm quite happy. I'll try and get as far as I can. Whereas this year I didn't have one at the halfway point and thought if I get to the finish I can get a beer. So it does work. Sort of delayed gratification element of it.
Yeah, definitely. As you say, it's really good having that kind of. It occupies your mind thinking about these things you're going to get. And it was something like on the Hardmore 60 race that I did, because that was a supported race. So I had my wife along, meeting me in certain places, which is all part of the way that race works. And I was ringing her up saying, I really need a cup of tea. Can you, like, you know, because I had a thermal cup in the car, so she could go to a cafe, buy a cup of tea into the thermal cup and bring it to me at the checkpoint. And it was just amazing. I was talking to her afterwards and said that sort of going through a checkpoint like that, where you can ring somebody up and get just what you want there for maybe, I started dreaming about, it'd be nice to have a cup of tea. That checkpoint's about an hour away. I'm already thinking about it. So then I'll ring her up. That'll take that's some more time thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then you end up with a good half hour running towards that checkpoint thinking, the tea's going to be there. Yes. And then afterwards you're thinking, it was so nice that she made that effort, and that was a good cup of tea. I've enjoyed that. So you end up with, it could be a good hour and a half of lifting your race.
Yeah.
I was explaining to her afterwards, like, I see her for about a minute, 2 minutes at the most at the checkpoint. But that occupies your mind for such a long time, and lifts you. But then it's interesting when you then go into something like the Spine that's unsupported.
Yeah.
And on the 108 miles, there's one checkpoint with a drop bag, and everything else you're carrying it.
Yeah.
Now there are a few. There are people. I'm calling them Spine Angels now, because there are people who go out and they're fans of the race, and they give drinks, cake to any runner that comes through, and that's allowed because they're not there to support any individual runner.
Not giving anybody an unfair advantage.
Not giving anyone an. They're giving anyone, not anyone that happens to come by at that point in time, which therefore is everybody. You either get lucky or you don't. Now some of the Spine Angels, I know them because of mountain rescue people, and some of them, there's two guys in a car at the side of a reservoir at 4 o'clock in the morning, I think. And one of them gave me a drink out of his thermal cup. I have no idea who these people are. You wouldn't normally do that, would you? Yeah, mate, do you want a drink of tea or coffee? You wouldn't normally go up to them and have a drink, but when you're in the middle of that kind of race, it's all fair game.
Yeah.
It wasn't my favourite drink of tea, peppermint tea. Not my normal brew.
I had quite an interesting experience. One of my long training runs for the Great Glen race, that it's about a 2 mile loop that I'll do in some woods in Leeds. It was quite like a nice summer's day, and there were some guys who sort of perched themselves at the top of this hill with, I'm guessing it's like a hunting rifle for like birds and stuff. And they had like a little bag of like whiskey and various other stuff, and they were obviously packing themselves there for the whole day, not expecting a ultra runner to be going past them every 2 mile loop. And then it got to the stage where they were sort of cheering me on and clapping as I was running past. And they were asking me how many loops I got left. So I think it was something like 12 or 14 loops that I was trying for. And they seemed quite impressed that I was getting near the end. And then they gave me some of the whiskey at like on the last loop. That It was only about a mile and a half back round to where I was finishing, but it was quite nice that shared experience of a day out.
Yeah, exactly. Share some whiskey with a couple of winos on top of a hill. It's the things we get up to, isn't it? Yeah. No, it's it is an interesting element of these races.
It's a far cry from the stereotype of marathons being the only place where you can safely accept sweets from strangers. So you just sort of the races you can accept slightly more.
Yeah. Flapjacks, pizza, mostly tea. Every time I saw one of these spine angels, I was trying to explain to some guys. I think he was a German guy, because it was his first time on the race, and I was trying to explain to him that if he sees some people standing around, clearly cheering racers on, and they're standing with cups in the hand or whatever, or cake, I said, don't be shy to ask them for some, because I know, because I know enough about the race. There's a difference between a member of the public standing there and you're asking them for their stuff, and somebody standing there who's trying to give it out. But when you're not used to running in this country, it's probably I can only imagine it's much harder to tell the difference. Whereas I've done enough running around here now that I can tell who's the people that are there that are offering stuff to anybody.
I can remember, because I've done 2 marathons abroad, the sort of because the ones I've done have both been in Italy, and the effort that they put into like making sure that stuff's ready, and that it's not a case of you stand there and wait for them to sort of mix something together for you, that they'll make sure that you can run past and literally take stuff as quickly as you need. Yeah,
have you done any of the Hardmoors races?
I have not.
Because the volunteers on that are like that. They see you coming in, shout your race number to each other. So like your little freezer bag, drop bag things. By the time you sort of get up to the table, it's there in your hand, because they've got them all laid out by race number straight across to you, asking what do you want. Like you say, they get it for you straight to you as fast as they can. It's really good, really well organised. John Steele, the race director there, is really good. He's a, I don't want to talk him up too much. I might have to have a chat with him one day. But he's a seriously good runner himself. And clearly he inspires his volunteers to look after things the way he would like it if he was running. And it's great. I've only done one Hardmoors race, and I need to go back and do more, because they're in fact even closer for you. They're just up North Yorkshire way.
I think you could sometimes tell as well when people have volunteered for quite a long time, they know what to say to runners. It gets them out of slumps, and like a lot of the time stuff that if it was a checkpoint where it's like a corporately organised marathon and they're giving people whatever incentive to come, you wouldn't necessarily get that there, but you get it in races where they've obviously done a bit more. Though it's a long time ago now, I did the Great North Run, and having the red arrows fly over the bridge, the Tyne Bridge, while you're running across, it's pretty nice. I think that needs to happen on more races. We'll have a chat with Wayne, the local race director, and tell him we want the red arrows flying over on his next race. See what he says. I think there's some races that sort of celebrate the last runner that I think is quite an interesting concept. So like the Great Glen Ultra had a Lantern Rouge award that like they had first, second, third, and last all got like a shield. It was
it is really good, and it was one of my kind of big disappointments actually on the spine, because I was so injured and in so much pain. I couldn't even cheer in the next person that finished behind me. I was literally lying on a bed with my leg elevated, taking as many drugs as the doctor would allow me to have, and just trying to get recovered enough to be able to get in the car and come home.
So does the thing about like caffeine and thingy work the same with drugs? That if you've not had them during the race, that they seem...
Well, I think so. Because I'd taken paracetamol during the race because you have to carry it in that race, and it did seem to be helping. And they gave me some cocodamol, and even with that, that was off the doctor at the finish. And actually, it wasn't. It was off I think it was off the physio. One of them was able to give me it, and the other one wasn't. I can't remember which way around now. And it just didn't even seem to take the edge off the pain. It was not the kind of pain you want to have. But yeah, I was actually sort of big disappointment for me to not be. I just wanted to be at least cheering the next few people at least before I left. Actually, as I got carried out to the car because I couldn't even vaguely walk, I was lifted over the top of Jen Scotney, who was lying on the floor nearly passed out, and I didn't even get a chance to speak.
I think it's amazing how much, like, especially if it's a race where you push yourself that much to get to the finish, that the crash afterwards can be quite quick. And
yeah, I mean, this was the first time that I haven't had that kind of big crash afterwards. Because of both the sort of nutrition strategy, the pace, and the mindset, that it was only the injury that was sort of crashing me. I did nearly pass out, and that's because I stopped too abruptly. Because when you've just run that far, you kind of need to like walk about a bit and stretch a bit and just let your body calm down. Especially because I pushed myself as hard as I could to get that finish time. But because of the pain, I just sat down.
Yeah, I think I
just stopped, and that's not the right way to finish.
I had a similar experience at the end of the Great Glen race that had sort of, and it finishes with this god awful like 300 metre loop around the track. That once, as soon as I'd got to the end and got like, because they give you a commemorative whiskey glass with this one, as soon as I got that, I sort of perched myself on a sofa and then didn't really move for about 20 minutes. And literally, when my dad sort of pulled the car up to like the outskirts of the stadium, I had to have him help me with one arm and my wife help me with the other arm to almost carry me into the car. If I'd have maybe walked around, I wouldn't have been in that bad a state. It's
something I've been thinking about a lot, because we're working on a podcast all about recovery. Actually, the first one's going to be aimed at recovery from training, so you can continue to train more, train better, get more from your training by recovering well between training runs, and then after that we'll look at one about recovery from a race. So I've been talking through these things recently about how much it helps you to start walking around and things, and just let your body calm down. And it's something interesting. I've heard from other people on other podcasts as well about when you start to get really experienced, like if you know you're going to eat at a checkpoint, for example, you can actually start eating some of your own food just a little bit before the checkpoint to start your digestion going, rather than having that whole thing sort of suddenly hit you. And if you're not going to sleep at a checkpoint, you kind of want to do the opposite. You want to you want to slow down into the checkpoint and start letting you just start running, kind of prepare yourself for like a sleeping routine, and think about, well, what is it that gets you ready to sleep? Otherwise you rush into the checkpoint, eat some food or something, and food and sleep are kind of opposites, with hormones and things. There's a whole world of these things to play with to get efficient at ultras.
I think that's one of the interesting things about multi-day events, that people have to almost factor in how they sleep and how long they need to sleep for during the race, and if it's something where that can give them a marginal advantage over somebody else. Somebody who does the Beer Ultra every year he's compared like some of the really long like multi-day events being a competition as to who can sleep the least rather than who can run the fastest. Well,
just looking at Jasmine on the spine, she wasn't really going at a faster pace, but she took 10 hours off the course record.
I think it was something like 7 or 8 hours that she'd slept over.
No, it was less than that. It was about 3. So I think she a total stop time.
Oh, was that the stop time?
Something like that. Yeah, she just slept way less than anybody else. Did you hear the full story of what happened with Eugenie in second place?
That he dropped out
6K from the finish. I've read his blog. It's written in Spanish, but using Google Translate. And essentially, he'd tried to get close to matching Jasmine on the lack of sleep element. Now, partly for him, he'd got a hole in his shoe at one point, and his foot had got damaged. So when he tried to sleep, he couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
So he basically had no sleep for most of that race. So even though he'd stopped and tried to sleep, he didn't actually get to sleep.
Yeah.
And when he got to that point coming down off Cheviot, he was hallucinating so much. He thought he was in the Arctic, and he'd set up his bivvy, and he was going to get inside of his bivvy and go to sleep. And he dreamt that he might have phoned a friend of his during this. What had actually happened was he'd phoned his friend 6 times. His friend had managed to convince him to press the SOS button on his tracker. There was no bivvy bag, he was lying in the snow. And if the rescue team hadn't got to him within 30 minutes the way they did, he would have been in very, very serious danger. He was already going hypothermic. They tried to help him carry on and finish, because actually he was so far ahead of third place, he would have still got second place, even if he just walked it into the finish. But he was just too far gone. So he put a massive effort in, but it caught him before the end. And that actually puts into context the achievement that Jasmine had of getting to the end with that little sleep. And just putting in that steady pace, and just incredible.
I suppose possibly an element for him might have been that because he's won the race before, hasn't he?
Yes.
That he might have expected that he could force himself through on that little sleep because it's something that he was familiar with.
But he's it's worth searching out his blog, and like I say, it's written in Spanish, but Google Translate does a decent job in translating it, and read it sort of first hand in his words. It's definitely interesting.
I'd read Jasmine's blog from before the Spine had started, and that was very impressive sort of stuff that you probably think is a big sacrifice in terms of occasionally getting up at 5 for a training run, but just getting up at 4 5 days out of 7 or something. That it was amazing, the amount of preparation that went into that performance, really.
If you listen to the podcast with Kim, a couple of episodes ago, Kim gets up at sort of 4:30 every morning and runs. She's seriously dedicated, and that's why, because the way I met Kim and a few other people, it was back in 2017 on the White Rose Ultra. It was my first ultra 30 miler, and spoke to people in the race, as you do, and then I started following on Strava everybody that finished ahead of me, just ahead of me, not the people that were way ahead that I couldn't hope to catch.
You've got that negativity in your life.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that also, I could start looking at how they trained and what was different for their training and my training. And quite a few of them I'm now friends with on Facebook as well as Strava, because when you follow somebody, they follow you back, and you see what each other are doing in other races. But I still can't keep up with Kim over. I think probably anything over 40 miles, I wouldn't be able to keep up with her. If she's if it's technical downhill, I know because I've been running with her, I can run faster than her. And I'm not fast technical downhill, so she's working on it. It'll come.
Is this based on a volume of training that she does compared to volume of yours?
Yeah, she's very, very dedicated. Because I think it's one of the things that you kind of ultimately have to end up having to make decisions on, and that we all have these dreams of being the best runner your physical body will allow you to be, because ultimately there are genetic limitations as to how good you could possibly be. But I think more so we have limitations of what lifestyle we're willing to have. In this, how much time you're going to spend with your family, how much time you spend working, how many beers do you want to still have? How much are you going to really sacrifice towards your running? And I think we all kind of sacrifice to two different levels, and it's not easy finding the balance that kind of really satisfies you. That's why some of the guests we've had on, I've been really interested to share their stories. The two Rachels that have been on, they're both in really sort of good place of finding that balance. Especially Rachel Ross Russell. She's doing really, putting in fantastic performances. First female on a lot of races. Running really, and again, I can't beat her. She's beaten me in two. I met her on one race, and then we ran together on the Hodmore 60 as well. She beat me on both races. It's really good to meet people like that have got that balance there. They're working full time, looking after a family, and achieving what they want to achieve out of the running. So it's really sort of satisfying. But without going too far on the sort of sacrifice of it, either sacrificing too much yourself because you're pushing those times, as you mentioned, for a marathon, which is something that the other Rachel, why am I forgetting her name?
Anne Cullen.
Rachel Ann Cullen, yes, who's she must be not far off releasing her second book now, actually, which is going to tell the story about, her first book is how she found running, and it changed her life by the improvement to her mental health, and our second book is about, and I'm really looking forward to reading it, about how the drive for the times then kind of made her kind of lose it again, and now she's kind of back to a much happier place where she's doing a lot more cross training, and the running is back to being what it's supposed to be about for her, which is the enjoyment. But it doesn't mean to say she's going to be slow, or and enjoying running doesn't mean you have to be at the back. It's
I think there's a fine balance between like people having running add to the total amount of stress in life and having it still be in that place where you'll clear your head and it reduces the level of stress in your life.
Yes.
That was something that was massive for me, because I think it was like 8 or 9 attempts that I had to try and get under 3:30, and I had that many that were sort of 3:35, 3:36 that you've trained for 3 or 4 months, and it's almost like that you're going to define how you see that period of your life by a 5 or 6 minute gap that doesn't really make sense.
Yep.
So I quite like that, although I'll still have the training runs where I'll push myself and try and maintain a reasonable split time, I'm not necessarily focusing all of my training on getting this distance under this time.
Yep. That sounds good. Just as we say that, it's kind of an experiment for me, but my next sort of training block, I am actually going to focus on shorter, faster.
Okay.
Just sort of see where I can get to.
Yeah.
Because as we were discussing before the podcast, I've kind of got a training block now to just kind of get in a good state and then do the Lakeland 3-day event, and then it's going to be a training block leading up to the Lakeland 100.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of into whatever I set as my next target for early next year.
Yeah.
So in this training block, I decided I'm going to take not a complete break from the long distance because I really like it, but do some different type of training for a while. Otherwise I'll end up with sort of 3 years of doing similar kind of training, just trying to kind of refine it all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, why not have a few months of doing a different kind of training?
Yeah.
Sort of shorter, faster, just for a change.
Yeah.
And see how it goes. If I start getting injured or something starts going wrong, I can change it again.
Yeah, I think I sort of go back and forth between having a couple of months where I'm almost exclusively running on trails to a couple of months where I'm exclusively on roads, and that seems to be enough for me. That if it's like a race where I know that some of the trail sections will be quite technical, I'll need to have that almost as like day in, day out. That's what I'm used to.
Yep.
So I'm quite lucky that where I live is about 20 minutes from the woods where I'd do most of my trail running, so it's not massively different having a 40-minute round trip for going out on trail instead of road.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't mention I've got about 500 yards to get on the trail from here.
I tend to try and run with my brother about once a week, and he's quite lucky that probably 100 yards from his house leads onto about 7 or 8 miles of trail.
Yeah. Well, I can run, like I say, about 500-600 yards to get on the trail, and then I can do about 90% trail. I have to touch a couple of bits of tarmac, and I can get onto the Pennine Way.
Okay.
So it's fairly limitless then, as far as I'm going to run.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've worked out a trail marathon route from my door, which has got probably less than a mile of road in it.
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah. It's
Have you tried doing much sort of out and back training where you started with the out and made your way home?
Yeah. That's how I set up some of these routes.
Yeah.
Kind of go out and see where I end up, and then think, okay, I need to find a way home now.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go back necessarily the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that quite interesting, that especially if it's like you're training to get a long run for preparation for a race, that you know that if you've made it out to a certain distance, you sort of have to make it back, that you can't.
Yeah, well, I did that for my recce on the Hardmoor 60.
Yeah.
I went and parked at the finish, and I ran, as far as I was kind of wanted to into the route, and then I was running back towards the finish.
Yeah.
My car was there, so.
I'd imagine in terms of like mental preparation for the race, it must be quite nice to have done that section.
Yes. I've mentioned it before, but definitely, if you're going to recce something, if you've only got a chance for one recce the end.
Yeah.
It's because that's when you're most tired, and it's most likely to be dark, and yeah. So one last thing that I wanted to ask you about, and you keep reminding me because I keep reading your T-shirt. I know that you've volunteered on a number of races. You've mentioned a couple of them along the way. So I just thought I'd ask you about that. What's it like volunteering on these races?
I think it's a bit more demanding than people might initially expect. That the first time when I was offered to volunteer somewhere, it was very much stand as a marshal at one point, pointing this way on the way going out, this way on the way coming back. Like volunteering at races where there's a bit more space in between checkpoints, and where you've got to sort of record times or get prepare food for people, can take quite a bit more time. And then there's some races where I've volunteered where the weather's a lot more extreme than what you'd expect for volunteering at a race that's over in a couple of hours. But you do find it quite rewarding, that being the other side of like seeing runners push themselves, that like I've had a couple of times where people who have seemed like in a really bad way at a checkpoint I've been volunteering at, and you see later on in the day that they finish, that can be quite like a real buzz for your weekend. Basically, if you've been out all day, you've thought they might not finish, and then you realise that they have. It's quite good that quite a lot of the places where you volunteer, you've got a free place in the event for future years. So that could be quite. So there's races that I've volunteered that have been a bit further afield that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to commit that much time to if I didn't think it would be something I'd want to do in the future. Yep.
So which of these two sky races are you doing?
Easier of the two. So I'm going to try and do the Scafell Sky Race in June.
Yeah.
But I've volunteered at the Lake Sky one for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So in terms of elevation, the Lake Sky one is significantly more challenging than the Scafell, but the Scafell one's still got 3,500 metres of climb, so it's by no means flat.
What distance is that?
40k.
40k. Yeah, it's quite a lot on 40k.
Yeah. So I think the Lake Sky one is about 60k and about 5,000 metres of climb.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
So in terms of
that's about the same as the White Rose 60.
Okay.
The difference is that a lot of the White Rose 60 is on road, which is, it is easier to climb on road.
Yeah.
Harder I find descending on road harder than descending off road. Because just the impact on your joints and things. I don't like steep tarmac descents. I find it quite brutal on the legs. But
I was up in the Lake District towards the end of September, and I tried to run up the struggle, and like the first couple of gradients were quite challenging, and then running back down was torture because you don't necessarily practice running down something that's that steep that's tarmac.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's because you know how much it hurts, so you tend not to plan your training runs to run down something that steep that's tarmac, exactly as you say. Yeah,
I think it's one of the rare things where trail's almost easier than tarmac because it's less impact, and even if it's steeper, you can sort of plan where you're placing your feet because you're used to doing it with the rest of trail.
Yeah, sounds like you volunteered at quite a few different races now.
I think it's about 6 or 7 now.
Yeah. Which is the most fun to volunteer for?
I'd probably say because it's a bit further from my house, the Lake Skye one is more of like a weekend. So the last 2 years they've had the Scafell race on the Sunday and the Lake Skye one on the Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a full mini breakaway.
Yeah.
I've quite liked that sort of race directors seem to be really appreciative of volunteers, and it's seen as a big deal in terms of races going ahead.
Absolutely.
So you feel that the support you get from volunteers when you're running, you've almost given a bit back for.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of the races I've volunteered on have been through support we do with Mountain Rescue, where we're doing safety cover and things on races. I've volunteered at a few, but not as many as you have. But yeah, it's very rewarding giving something back. Definitely.
I think in terms of if it's a race where you know a familiar face at a checkpoint as well, that can make a big difference.
Huge difference. I came into the checkpoint on the spine, and there was a couple of guys in the checkpoint who they're in the same. It's a running group. It's not a club that I'm in. That's on Facebook, and they knew I was doing the race because there was about 4 people from this group in the race, and walk into the checkpoint and they say, "Oh, hi Kev, how you doing?" I said, "Who are you?" It's such and such. Oh, right, great. And it's just you don't recognise them because they got the big coats on and everything. Because I'm sure you know when you're standing there, you get pretty cold. But when you're running, you don't necessarily wear anywhere near that many layers compared to the people that are stood there. I mean, it's like tonight, Sue at the top of the track there, taking in the times. Massive coat on and big boots and everything to keep warm
in 2 relatively thin layers.
Yeah, and I've got a long sleeve top and a thin gilet on just to keep the wind off a bit. And that's fine when you're running. But
I think there's something about some of the marshals and volunteers in the lakes that they're used to sort of being out for quite long times at elevations like that. So I did the Grand Tour of Skiddaw again year before last, and that was quite interesting. They had somebody up at the main checkpoint at the top of Skiddaw who was very experienced in terms of he's a race director himself, and you could tell that being up there for, I'm guessing, 8 or 10 hours was nothing to him, whereas to me it would be a huge deal.
It's stuff that, like you say, either sort of being a race director or somebody that just volunteers, or doing something like Mountain Rescue. That gets you stood up on top of hills for long periods of time. I had an interesting experience with that. There was we had a rescue where joint between about 5 teams on it in the end with some Duke of Edinburgh kids last year. And as we were walking over the top of one hill to drop down into the valley where they were, I realised that the people in the bottom of the valley couldn't radio out. So I stopped just on the cusp of the hill to link the radio comms. And this was there was about a foot of snow on the ground. It was pretty cold. And so I was there for the next 4 hours, I think. Because if I moved, we couldn't guarantee comms. So I've I know what it's like. But again, that's why, when we go out like that with Mountain Rescue, I'm carrying a big backpack with lots of extra clothes. I had a 3-man shelter with me, so the 3 of us that were there, we had some time in the shelter. Had to keep getting out of the shelter to answer the radio and stuff like that. But that's why you see, like MR people and that walking around with big backpacks on, because there's lots of kit in there to look after ourselves. Whereas when we're out running, want to carry as little as possible.
Yeah.
And you hear people complaining about having to carry like a safety bivvy or a foil blanket or
I
something.
think waterproof trousers is the one that seems to be most common. People will complain
Well,
about.
I mean, the best explanation is actually from Wayne, and it was him that first really explained it to me, and it's a very valid point. Is that if we're out running, you and I, and let's say we're in a race and we just happen to be together, if I fall down and break my leg, right, you're going to get out my foil blanket or emergency bivvy, stick it on me, and whatever other clothes I've got. You're not going to leave me now, I hope.
Yeah.
You're going to get cold very quickly, and that's where the waterproof trousers come in.
Okay.
Because it's when you're stood there helping somebody else, that's when you need them.
Yeah.
And like I say, until it was explained to me, I didn't get it either. I was thinking, well, yeah, even if I get hurt, I'm going to still move fast enough. I don't really need them. I'm never going to wear them. But it's if you need to stop to help somebody else, you could end up in a serious situation yourself.
Yeah.
And that's where you need as much kit as possible to look after yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good question. It's a common question, and it's one I've asked. That's why I know the answer.
Yeah, it's something that I've almost experimented with in terms of running when the weather's been like snow, for example. Just because I've thought I've had 5 years of having this in a rucksack for events that I've never really used. That if I do end up in a situation where it's monsoon type hail and they will benefit slightly, I want to have had some experience in using them.
But yeah, I've again end up putting on waterproof trousers less and less often the more experienced I get, which is kind of counterintuitive. But again, partly it's a question of how long you're going to be out in it. I had a recent training run where it was the day where we had the frozen rain coming down, so as soon as it touched the surface it turned to ice. We were on top of Kinder that day, and I didn't stop to put waterproof trousers on because I knew I was going to be back in the car in about 20 minutes, and the stopping would have cooled me down more than the warmth from putting them on. Now if I was going to be out for another hour, I definitely would have put them on. And I got back to the car, I had ice in the material of my leggings, because the rain went into it and then the wind froze it. So the ice was entwined in the material. I've never had anything like it.
I've had it where it's frozen in my socks, but I've sort of justified that a bit more than
but it's interesting to gain in the experience with all the kit. But I guess because I've done mountaineering and mountain rescue before, I've kind of got serious about running. Hopefully I know what some of the kit's for and why. Because keeping yourself safe ultimately is the most important thing. Unfortunately, serious things do happen out there in the hills, and it's fantastic having the volunteers out helping to look after us all, which is the race volunteers and the mountain rescue volunteers. So shall we end it there? I always like ending on things like thanking volunteers and things like that, because it's kind of goodwill to all men kind of message, isn't it? So keep up the volunteering. It's really good.
Thank you.
And hopefully I'll see you when I'm running a race soon. Right. So thanks very much for your time. Thanks for coming along. Thanks. Thank you very much for listening. That was episode 17 with Martin Slack. Thank you very much for Martin for coming along, and thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe to the podcast. Keep listening to the episodes. Share it with your friends. Tell people about this, and send us questions. Let us know if you're doing something interesting that you'd like to talk about. If there's something you'd like to hear on the podcast, then let us know. We are working on a few interesting episodes, a few things in the pipeline, so we'll be back soon. Thank you.